Welcome to Beth's Happy Home. You may not know this, but in the Bible, where there's this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they are given the pulse instead of the rich foods of the king of Babylon, they are much healthier after just a couple of weeks. And what that food is that was called pulse in the Bible was a lentil stew. And so we all know that we should eat more legumes, but you can only eat so much stewed lentil without getting sick of it. So I have some recipes that are better ways to get lentils into your diet without that recipe fatigue. But the good news is you can also grind them with an electric grinder into a very fine flour. And you can see that the texture of this flour is just very similar to all-purpose flour, but this has a ton of protein and a ton of fiber. It's super nutritious flour, and you can use it like you would use any other gluten-free flour. So this is a lentil bread that I made using basically my cornbread recipe, but substituting the flours for lentil flour. The flavor is fantastic. I would prefer this to cornbread. You can't taste anything different. Sometimes when I've ground up beans and used the flour to cook with, I notice that the batter tastes terrible. The raw beans do not taste good at all. And so if you taste the batter when you're making this recipe, you're going to say, oh, this is awful, and throw it away without ever baking it. But once the recipe is baked, it's fantastic. Super nutritious, super easy using lentil flour. Second thing that I want to show you is kind of a nifty trick, and that is taking a half cup, or well, any quantity that you want. Just use twice as much water as you do the lentil flour. So here's a half a cup of lentil flour, here's a cup of water, just a pinch of salt, that's probably about a quarter teaspoon, and stir it up real well until the flour is completely blended with the water. And it's going to make kind of a batter. Now at first it's going to seem really liquidy, but the flour will absorb the water pretty quickly. Been sitting for about 5 minutes. This pan is heated up, and I'm going to cook it almost like a crepe. And what I'm making are wraps that you can use for savory or sweet things. This is the second one, and once the pan is good and hot, the second and third and fourth one will come up much more easily than the first one does, and that's been the case every time I've made these. There we go. Aren't they lovely? Okay, so we've got our bread that turned out delicious. We've got our little wrap type pancakes that are plenty flexible and strong to support a taco or something like that. The third thing I wanted to show you was these are lentils that are cooked with twice as much water like you would rice. And I just simmered them down until they were tender, and this is what you get. It's very similar to split peas in the texture, and they do kind of start to dissolve and make their own sauce. You can see it's kind of a thick, pasty texture. I would recommend at this stage, if you're in a hurry, just go ahead and serve it over some quinoa or rice, and put a little bit of sauce, salsa or something like that over the top of it, and you have a meal ready really quickly. But my purposes in showing you this is to show how it's an excellent meat stretcher because it has a pleasant flavor on its own. And then I have browned this pound of hamburger and drained it. And I have a large onion that I chopped up in there too. And so by adding those lentils, you have a filling that is a very good texture to function as a taco filling. The lentils have just enough texture once they've been cooked to give that feeling, that mouth texture that is so desirable when you're making a taco filling or an enchilada filling, that it's ideal for using that way as a meat substitute or a meat stretcher, as I'm doing in this case. And this is a good, as you can see, this is a good texture. It holds together well. It would make a really good enchilada filling, or it would be perfect used in a wrap to make a taco. So, on to the next thing. Here is another lentil project, and I bet you have never thought of using lentils for breakfast, but this is going to be a delectable breakfast. This is a pancake batter, and it's just a typical pancake batter recipe using the same amount of liquid as flour. And so I have a half a cup of milk and a half a cup of lentil flour, an egg, a half a teaspoon of baking powder, and a little pinch of salt in here. And I also added some sweetener, which I used artificial sweetener. You can use any kind that you want. Maple syrup would taste good. And I also added about a half a teaspoon of vanilla, just to give it kind of a desserty, extra special little twist in the flavor. And this is the way the batter, so it looks like it's just right for pancake batter. I like it a little bit thin. So I'm going to move it over here and cook it on my hot griddle. No one would ever guess that these pancakes were made of something as wonderfully nutritious as lentils. But it is absolutely worthy of being a dessert.